August 1977. Mid-morning on Graceland's front lawn, Elvis Presley kneels in the grass feeding a scruffy dog while his entire staff watches from a distance. Maids in uniform, security guards, managers, even a few photographers somehow allowed past the gates. The dog is matted, ribs visible through dirty gray fur, wearing a worn red collar with no tags. Elvis won't let anyone else near it. For 3 days, he's barely left his bedroom, barely spoken to anyone. But now he's out here in jeans and a work shirt, hand-feeding this stray like it's the only thing that matters. Staff exchanges worried glances. Elvis hasn't been this present, this focused, this there in years. The dog stares at Elvis like it knows something nobody else does. Colonel Parker isn't here. Priscilla left years ago. Pills are everywhere inside. But out here, it's just Elvis and this dog. 1 week later, Elvis is found dead, the dog howling outside his bathroom door. What happened in those 7 days changed everyone who witnessed it. And that red collar, it disappeared the night he died, because what was sewn inside the lining explains everything. By August 1977, Graceland had become Elvis Presley's fortress and prison. The 14-acre estate in Memphis housed the man who'd sold over 600 million records, defined rock and roll, become a global icon, and who now barely left his second-floor bedroom, and staff rotated in 24-hour shifts. But Elvis remained mostly alone, with 14 television screens mounted on the wall and prescription bottles covering every surface. His marriage to Priscilla had ended 4 years earlier. Colonel Tom Parker controlled every contract, every dollar, every decision. Elvis weighed 250 pounds. He hadn't written a song in years. The world knew Elvis Presley, the legend nobody knew, the man who couldn't sleep, couldn't stop the pills, couldn't remember the last time someone touched him without wanting something. Every night, between 2 and 4 in the morning, Elvis walked the Graceland grounds alone, circling the same paths, checking the same gates. On the night of August 9, during one of these walks, he found the dog outside the iron fence. Matted German shepherd, ribs showing, wearing a worn red collar with no identification tags. The dog didn't bark, didn't move, just stared at Elvis through the bars like it had been waiting. Elvis knelt in the gravel. For the first time in months, something in his chest unlocked. He carried the dog inside himself, refused to let security touch it, and by dawn, the animal was asleep in Elvis's bed, a space that had been forbidden territory for everyone, including family, for years. Staff whispered in hallways. Elvis hadn't shown physical affection to another living thing in longer than anyone could remember. Why now? What changed? The morning after the dog arrived, Elvis sat on his bathroom floor examining the red collar, cracked leather, worn smooth in places, the inside lining partially torn along one seam. He worked his fingers into the tear and felt something. Paper folded tight. It took him 3 minutes to extract it without ripping. A handwritten note on lined paper, the ink faded but legible. Elvis read it twice, then sat silent for 2 hours. Staff knocked, worried, no answer. When Elvis finally emerged, he walked past his morning medications. 14 pills arranged in precise rows, untouched for the first time in 3 years. He called his estate lawyer. "I need to change my will," he said. The lawyer asked what prompted this. Elvis hung up. The dog followed him everywhere that day, bedroom to bathroom, bathroom to kitchen, kitchen back to bedroom. Staff noticed Elvis talking to the animal like it was a person, long quiet conversations where he'd pause as if listening to responses. By evening, Elvis was doing something nobody had seen in years, asking staff members about their families. "How's your daughter doing in school? Did your son get that job? Is your mother feeling better?" These weren't polite questions. Elvis listened to the answers, remembered details, asked follow-ups. One security guard later said, "It was like the real Elvis came back for a few days. The one we all loved working for before everything went wrong." But nobody understood what triggered it. What was in that note? What did the dog represent? And why did Elvis keep the red collar on his bathroom counter, staring at it every morning like it held the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life? Elvis stopped answering Colonel Parker's calls on August 11th. This was unprecedented. Parker had managed Elvis for 22 years, controlled every aspect of his career, took 50% of everything Elvis earned through contracts Elvis signed when he was young and desperate. The arrangement had made both men millions and left Elvis in debt. Parker scheduled the tours, negotiated the Vegas residencies, decided which movies Elvis would make. Elvis signed, performed, obeyed. But after the dog arrived, something shifted. Parker's calls went to voicemail. His visits to Graceland got deflected by staff. Elvis spent hours with the dog, talking, sitting in silence, occasionally crying in ways that made his closest aides look away. Staff noticed other changes. Elvis eating real meals instead of picking at food, writing in notebooks he'd never opened, making phone calls to people he hadn't spoken to in years, childhood friends, distant family members, musicians from his early days. In public, a September tour loomed, 28 cities, Colonel Parker's latest guaranteed money machine. Vegas obligations waited. Rehearsals should have started weeks ago. Parker demanded meetings. Elvis ignored him. To one staff member, Elvis said something that nobody understood at the time. "That dog knew exactly where to find me." The red collar stayed on the bathroom counter, visible every time Elvis passed. He touched it before sleeping, stared at it while brushing his teeth, carried it to the kitchen once just to have it near. On August 13th, Elvis did something that shocked everyone. He called his ex-wife Priscilla and apologized, not for the divorce, but for the years of distance, the years of choosing pills and isolation over being present for their daughter, Lisa Marie. He called estranged family members, said sorry for things that happened 5, 10, 15 years ago. Staff exchanged worried looks. Something fundamental had shifted in Elvis. But what? What was the dog? What was the collar? And why did it feel like Elvis was preparing for something? Colonel Tom Parker arrived at Graceland unannounced on August 10th, pushing past security with the confidence of a man who'd never been refused. He found Elvis in the backyard, sitting on the grass, the German shepherd's head in his lap. This wasn't the Elvis Parker knew. The controllable, medicated, compliant Elvis who signed whatever Parker put in front of him. This Elvis was clear-headed, calm, present. Parker saw the red collar on the patio table, asked about the dog, got deflected with a smile. "Just a stray I found," Elvis said. Parker's eyes moved to Elvis's hands, steady, not shaking. To the patio, no pill bottles in sight. To the house, staff members looked at Parker differently now, less deferential. Parker asked about the September tour. Elvis said he'd get back to him. "Get back to me?" Parker's voice rose. "We have contracts, venues, deposits." Elvis just nodded, scratching behind the dog's ears. Parker left Graceland 30 minutes later with a knot in his stomach he couldn't explain. That night, he checked phone records. Elvis had called his estate lawyer 3 times in 2 days. Parker's fear crystallized. Elvis clear-headed meant Elvis questioning things. Elvis questioning things meant Elvis might discover how much Parker actually controlled, how much debt existed, how many deals had been structured to benefit Parker more than Elvis. Back at Graceland, Elvis sat alone with the dog, staring at the red collar. Later, he'd tell his closest aide, Joe, Esposito, something that Joe would remember forever. "Tom, how much do I actually owe you?" Not, "How much do we make together?" or "What's the tour worth?" but "How much do I owe you?" Parker had built an empire on Elvis never asking that question. Now, because of a stray dog and a worn collar with something sewn inside, Elvis was finally awake enough to wonder. You think Colonel Parker was scared of Elvis canceling a tour? Parker was terrified of something much worse. Elvis canceling Parker. What Elvis found sewn inside the collar lining was a handwritten note on paper torn from a spiral notebook dated January 1974, 3 years before the dog arrived. The message was simple. If you're reading this, you found him. He was supposed to find you. You'll know what to do. It was signed Sarah, no last name, with an address in Memphis, a small house 14 miles from Graceland. Elvis spent 2 days researching before he understood. The address belonged to a woman named Sarah Watkins, who died in December 1976, 7 months before the dog arrived. But that wasn't what shook Elvis. Sarah Watkins was the woman who'd saved his life in 1956, 21 years earlier, before fame swallowed him whole. Back then, Elvis was 21, performing in small venues, unknown, broke. His appendix burst after a show in Memphis. He collapsed backstage, no money for a hospital, nobody around who cared. Sarah Watkins, a nurse who'd been in the audience, drove him to the emergency room herself, paid for the surgery with money she'd been saving for her own mother's care, stayed with Elvis through the night. Elvis never got her full name, never found her again to say thank you. Now, 2 decades later, she was dead, and she'd left him a dog, trained to find Graceland, trained to recognize Elvis's voice, trained to show up when darkness came, as neighbors would later tell investigators. Sarah had spent 3 years training that German Shepherd, telling people he saved me once by making me believe something beautiful was possible. I'll save him once, even if I'm not alive to see it. The dog escaped its caretaker exactly 1 week before Elvis would overdose. The timing was impossible. Or maybe it was perfect. Elvis sent Joe Esposito, his most trusted aide, to the Memphis address on August 12th. Joe found Sarah Watkins' former home, talked to neighbors, pieced together a story that seemed impossible until enough people confirmed the same details. Sarah had died of cancer in December 1976. No husband, no children, no family. She'd worked as a nurse for 40 years, retired in 1970, spent her final 6 years obsessed with one mission, training a German Shepherd to save Elvis Presley. Neighbors described her buying books on dog training, spending hours teaching the animal to recognize specific sounds, specific voices, specific locations. She'd play Elvis records all day, one neighbor said. Train that dog to respond to Elvis's voice like it was a command. Another neighbor remembered Sarah saying, "Dogs know when someone needs them. This one will know." She arranged for a caretaker to take the dog after she died with specific instructions. Keep him until he wants to leave. He'll know when. The dog escaped 7 days before Elvis was found dead. It traveled 14 miles, somehow found Graceland, somehow appeared exactly when Elvis was at his lowest point. Unable to sleep, unable to stop the pills, unable to remember why living mattered. Joe returned to Graceland with photographs, witness statements, Sarah's obituary from the local paper. Elvis sat on his bedroom floor, reading everything twice, the dog's head on his lap, tears running down his face. She died saving someone who didn't save himself, Elvis said. Joe didn't know what to say. That night, Elvis realized something that broke him. The dog had appeared exactly 7 days before he would have been found dead from an overdose. If you believe in timing, it was perfect. If you believe in impossible things, it was a miracle. If you believe in last chances, it was both. On August 14th, 2 days before his death, Elvis made the most radical decision of his final years. He gathered his core staff, Joe Esposito, his cousin Billy Smith, his road manager, and told them he was canceling the September tour. All of it. 28 cities, millions in contracted revenue, Colonel Parker's carefully constructed schedule. I'm done, Elvis said. I'm going to rehab. Real rehab, not the celebrity places where they just give you different pills. Somewhere that'll actually help. Staff sat in stunned silence. Elvis continued, I'm rewriting my will. Parker's getting less, family's getting more, and I'm donating to the animal shelter where Sarah volunteered before she got sick. One aide asked the obvious question. Does Colonel Parker know? Elvis smiled, sad, determined, finally clear. He will. That afternoon, Elvis called Priscilla. The conversation lasted 90 minutes. He apologized for the divorce, for being absent, for choosing fame and pills over being Lisa Marie's father. He promised change. Priscilla, cautious but hopeful, said she'd support him. Elvis called his daughter, told her he loved her, said he'd be different when she saw him next. He meant it. Staff who witnessed these calls would later say Elvis sounded like himself again. Not the icon, not the prisoner, but the man they'd known before everything went wrong. That night, August 15th, hours before he'd die, Elvis told Joe something that would haunt everyone who heard it. That dog gave me a week I didn't earn. 7 days to see clearly. 7 days to try. The red collar sat on the bathroom counter where Elvis had placed it that morning. Leather worn smooth, lining torn open where he'd extracted Sarah's note. Elvis touched it before bed, whispered, "Thank you, Sarah," and set an alarm for 6 the next morning. He planned to call a rehab facility in California, take the first real step toward freedom he'd attempted in years. The alarm would never ring. But you need to understand, for 7 days, Elvis Presley tried to save himself. August 15th into August 16th, 1977, the final night. Elvis couldn't sleep. Typical insomnia that had plagued him for years. But this time felt different. Peaceful. The dog lay on the bed, head on Elvis's chest, both of them breathing synchronized. For the first time in months, Elvis wasn't restless, wasn't desperate, wasn't reaching for pills to force unconsciousness. He read a book, not a manual or a script, but an actual novel he'd been meaning to read for years. He made notes in a journal, writing things he wanted to remember, things he wanted to tell Lisa Marie when he saw her next. He wrote letters, short ones, just a few lines, to old friends saying he was sorry, saying he'd be better, saying he'd see them soon. Around 2 a.m, he took a bathroom break, saw the red collar sitting on the counter, smiled at it like it was an old friend. The leather was cracked, the lining torn where he'd extracted Sarah's note, but it meant everything now. It meant someone 20 years ago had cared enough to save him twice. Once in 1956 with an emergency room. Once in 1977 with a trained dog that found him at exactly the right moment. Elvis returned to bed. The dog shifted closer. Elvis whispered, "Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to do this right." But his body had been through too much. 7 days of sudden sobriety after 3 years of constant medication. 7 days of clarity after years of pills for sleeping, pills for waking, pills for performing, pills for existing. Around 2:30 a.m., Elvis decided, for the first time in a week, to take one sleeping pill. Just one. A Placidol tablet, prescribed, legal. Something he'd taken 1,000 times before. He thought he was past danger. He thought 7 days was enough for his system to reset. He was wrong. The pill hit differently after 7 days of sobriety. His body couldn't process it the same way. By 6 a.m., when the alarm was supposed to ring, Elvis wasn't breathing. At 2:30 p.m. on August 16th, 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive on his bathroom floor by his girlfriend, Ginger Alden. She screamed. Outside the bathroom door, the German shepherd howled. a sound that made every staff member's blood freeze. Ginger tried to open the door, but the dog was scratching at it, frantic, desperate, howling in a way animals do when they know something humans don't want to admit. Staff arrived within seconds. Joe Esposito pushed past the dog, found Elvis face down on the carpet, not breathing. They called 911, tried to revive him, moved his body to the bedroom. The dog wouldn't leave. Staff had to physically pull the animal away, and even then, it fought, clawed, refused to stop howling. Paramedics arrived, attempted resuscitation, called it. Elvis Presley was transported to Baptist Memorial Hospital and pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m. in the official cause, cardiac arrhythmia. The truth was more complicated. Years of prescription drug abuse, sudden sobriety, one final pill his body couldn't handle. Within hours, Graceland was sealed. Thousands of fans gathered outside the gates, crying, holding vigils, unable to process that Elvis was gone. Inside, staff moved through rooms in shock. Someone noticed the red collar was missing from Elvis's bathroom counter. They searched for an hour before finding it in the pocket of Elvis's bathrobe, the one he'd been wearing when he collapsed. He'd been holding it. In his final moments, alone on the bathroom floor, Elvis had the collar in his hand. Joe Esposito would later extract Sarah's note from the evidence, preserve it before anyone else saw. The message, simple, impossible, perfect, explained everything and nothing. If you're reading this, you found him. He was supposed to find you. You'll know what to do. Elvis had known what to do. He'd tried. For 7 days, he'd tried to save himself. The dog stayed in Elvis's bedroom for 3 days, refusing food, refusing comfort, howling every night at 2:30 a.m., the exact time Elvis had been found. Some things dogs just know. The autopsy revealed what staff already suspected. Elvis died from an interaction between 7-day sobriety and a single sleeping pill. His body, conditioned to constant medication for years, couldn't process the Placidol tablet the same way after a week clean. What should have been routine became fatal. But here's what the autopsy didn't capture. Elvis's final week showed a man trying to change. The letters he'd written were found in his bedroom. Short notes to old friends, longer ones to Priscilla and Lisa Marie, plans for rehab, revisions to his will that would reduce Colonel Parker's control and increase family provisions. He'd made calls to facilities in California, researched programs that might actually help, instead of just substituting one pill for another. For 7 days, Elvis Presley had been clear-headed, purposeful, and genuinely trying to save his own life. The dog refused food for 3 days. Staff debated what to do with the animal. Nobody wanted the responsibility, and Colonel Parker, sure as hell, didn't want a reminder of the week Elvis almost broke free. Then Elvis's grandmother, Minnie Mae Presley, made the decision. He stays here, at Graceland, with us. The dog lived 4 more years, mostly sleeping in Elvis's bedroom, occasionally wandering the grounds at 2:30 a.m. like it was still searching. It died in 1981 and was buried on the Graceland property, a small marker with no name, just friend. The red collar was kept by Joe Esposito, who never displayed it publicly, never sold it, never allowed it to become a piece of Elvis memorabilia. It meant too much. Sarah Watkins' story emerged slowly through staff interviews, neighbor testimonies, public records that confirmed she'd saved Elvis's life in 1956 and spent her final years training a dog to save him again. And the timing remained impossible to explain. How did the dog escape exactly 7 days before Elvis would overdose? How did it find Graceland? How did it know Elvis needed saving right then? Science doesn't answer those questions. Faith doesn't need to. Elvis Presley's death at age 42 became global news within hours. Vigils formed in every major city. Radio stations played his music nonstop. Newspapers ran front-page obituaries remembering the king of rock and roll. But inside Graceland, a smaller, quieter story unfolded about a man who'd spent his final week trying to save himself because a stray dog and a worn red collar reminded him that someone once cared enough to try. The dog, still unnamed by Elvis, still referred to by staff as the dog or Sarah's dog, became a living reminder of what almost happened. Elvis had been 7 days sober, making phone calls, writing letters, planning rehab, ready to finally confront Colonel Parker about the contracts and debts that had kept him performing when he should have been healing. Staff who witnessed those 7 days would later give interviews describing a different Elvis. Focused, kind, present, genuinely trying. One aide said, "He was the Elvis we all loved again. The one who asked about your family, remembered your birthday, made you feel like you mattered." Another said, "That dog did something we couldn't do. Made Elvis remember he was worth saving." The red collar stayed with Joe Esposito until his own death in 2016 when it passed to Elvis's estate. Kept private, never exhibited. Lisa Marie Presley, inheriting Graceland in 1982, learned her father's final week from staff who'd witnessed it. She kept the collar's story within the family. Too personal, too painful, too much like a glimpse of the father she almost got back. Colonel Parker continued managing Elvis Presley's posthumous career, controlling Elvis Presley Enterprises, making millions from the legend he'd helped create and, exploit. Parker never publicly acknowledged the dog, the collar, or Elvis's final week of sobriety. Why would he? That week represented everything Parker had spent 22 years preventing. Elvis, clear-headed enough to question the arrangement. If you want to know what could have been, talk to the staff who saw it. They'll tell you Elvis almost made it. Here's the cost nobody talks about. Elvis Presley died trying. That matters. For years, the narrative focused on prescription drug abuse, weight gain, Vegas excess, the decline of an icon. All true. But it misses the final chapter. 7 days when Elvis stopped taking pills, started making calls, planned rehab, tried to break free from the machinery that had consumed him. 7 days when a stray German shepherd and a worn red collar reminded him that change was possible, that someone had once cared enough to save him without wanting anything back. The tragedy isn't that Elvis died. It's that he died trying to live. Grenah. Parker's control continued posthumously. Elvis Presley Enterprises became a revenue machine generating millions yearly from music rights, Graceland tours, merchandise, licensing deals. Parker took his percentage until his own death in 1997. The contracts Elvis planned to challenge remained intact. Lisa Marie Presley inherited Graceland in 1982 and gradually learned her father's final week from staff who'd been there, who'd seen Elvis sober and purposeful for the first time in years. She kept the collar's story private, not from shame, but from a deep, painful understanding that her father had been trying to become the person she needed him to be. Almost. The red collar became a family artifact, a symbol of what almost was. Multiple staff members, in later interviews and memoirs, confirmed Elvis told them variations of the same thing. If I'd found that dog 10 years earlier, everything would be different. Maybe. Maybe not. But for 7 days in August 1977, Elvis Presley believed change was possible, believed someone cared enough to send help even after death, believed he was worth saving. That belief killed him, not because it was wrong, but because his body couldn't handle the shock of sudden sobriety after years of medication. 7 days wasn't enough time for his system to reset. One sleeping pill, taken out of habit, became fatal. The cost of trying to save yourself after spending years destroying yourself. Sometimes it's everything. Today, Graceland receives over 600,000 visitors annually. They tour Elvis's home, see his gold records, stand in the jungle room where he recorded his final album, visit his grave where he rests beside his mother. The story they hear is about the king, of rock and roll, sold 600 million records, revolutionized music, became a global icon. What they don't hear is the story of Sarah Watkins, a nurse who saved Elvis's life in 1956 and spent her final years training a German Shepherd to save him again. That story has emerged slowly through staff memoirs published decades after Elvis's death, through neighbor interviews, through public records that confirm Sarah died in December 1976 and left specific instructions about a dog that was supposed to find someone when darkness came. The red collar remains in the Presley family's private collection, never exhibited, too personal, too heavy with meaning. It's worn leather now, cracked and faded, the inside lining permanently torn where Elvis extracted Sarah's handwritten note. That note still exists, preserved by Joe Esposito, and eventually passed to the estate. The message is simple. The timing was impossible, the outcome was tragic, but here's what the dog's story really means: unconditional love showing up exactly when you need it most, even if you don't survive it. Elvis Presley's final week proves change is possible until the last moment, proves someone trying to save themselves deserves to be remembered for trying, proves 7 days of sobriety and purpose and clarity matter, even if they end badly. The dog, buried somewhere on Graceland grounds, marked only as friend, represents the last pure thing in Elvis's life. No contracts, no percentages, no Colonel Parker taking his cut. Just a German Shepherd trained by a woman who'd been saved by Elvis's music 20 years earlier, sent to return the favor. Some stories don't end with triumph. Some end with a worn red collar, empty now, carrying more weight than gold records ever could. Some end with 7 days, 7 days more than he would have had alone.